Accidental Safety Pro, brought to you by Vivid Learning Systems and the Health and Safety Institute. Episode number 3. My name is Jill James, Vivid's Chief Safety Officer, and today I'm joined by Joe. Joe is from the greater Philadelphia area and is currently the Director of Occupational Health Services at Insipra Health Network. Welcome to the show today, Joe, and thanks for being with us.
Sure. I really appreciate you having me in, the greater Philadelphia area. Still very excited over, our Eagles Super Bowl champion. We get up every day with that, being excited. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Congratulations.
It's been a long time.
You can continue to live in that zone. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, so how many years have you been in the safety profession?
I started in various roles, but, it goes all the way back to 1996, when I was a volunteer EMT and eventually went paid. And, even that has a component of safety to it, but I started at a manufacturing plant in 2001, quickly joined their emergency response team. And I was at that refinery for, 13 or 14 years and had a number of different roles. But I eventually went from production and I made the big jump over to safety. And, with safety came occupational health. Within a year or two, I was promoted to the site, emergency response coordinator, which I really enjoyed, and I like responding to things and stuff like that. And I guess as some others would know it, putting out the fire, and maybe figuratively and literally. But, in my career, I remember seeking advice from those older than me and those that had been in the field for a while. And I said, hey, I really feel like I can make it to the next level. What do I need to do? And their response was, you have to put the radio down. And, that was kind of eye-opening for me. I basically realized
what did that mean? Yeah.
You had to stop responding to things and be proactive. You had to prevent them, right? You couldn't react. You had to be proactive. So that was what that meant. So, a couple people gave me that advice, and it was good advice. My career then took me to a healthcare facility in Philadelphia, and that facility was known as the English House, and that was a live-in and outpatient facility where folks all had spinal cord impairments for various reasons, but they were very intact as far from a intelligence perspective, and so you never had a bad day there. You would really just enjoy going and speaking with people. The building was very historical in Philadelphia, so from a safety perspective, it was difficult to manage because things like ceiling lifts and stuff don't fit well in a 100-year-old plus building. So
right.
And then I went over to an HVAC company that was well known in this area, and I got a lot of fleet and risk experience with that, and I would say that things were going very well there, and then a series of things happened, and basically it's one of those, the recruiter reached out to me at the right time when things were happening, and I thought it was the right move for me, and I ended up at Insipra, and I don't regret my decisions or my path a bit.
What a great story, and what a winding path. Like we always say, no one really kind of got into this profession, not often anyway, with purpose. We kind of came about it through some winding path or accidentally, as is the name of our podcast today. So, Joe, I want to back up just a little bit. And I've been thinking about this for my career as well. Was there any time in your life, like, did you grow up with safety around you, or was there something that you think maybe sort of planted that first seed for safety or prevention in your mind?
Oh, sure. I mean, and I always tell people, I just went through my birthday, and, I always tell people I hate my birthday, and they say, why is that? And I said, well, when I grew up as a kid, and I mean a young kid, maybe 5, 6 years old, my dad was a diesel truck mechanic, and, he was involved in an accident at work where he was working on something and, basically suffered, a catastrophic back injury, and then he had to go through a series of surgeries, and kind of each one, in my view, as a kid, worse than the next, right? I specifically remember one instance on my birthday where my dad was going for a checkup from one of these surgeries, and my mom had my neighbor watching me, and it was supposed to be a 1 or 2 hour thing. Next thing I know, it was dark, and it started to seem like, where's my mom at? This was in the day of, no cell phones or things like that,
Right.
And I had found out that there had been complications in that surgery, and basically, my dad was, back in the hospital, with more issues. And so, all the while, as a young kid, you're not aware of what companies are thinking, or what people think, or how
Mhm.
work injuries are perceived from the outside,
Mhm.
I now, in reflection and having heard my dad's story, he was really treated badly by the company, that they just, didn't do right by him, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think that my approach in safety has always been do the right thing, you know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
think if you approach it that way, you may find yourself in conflict at times, but you always are good to yourself. You never feel as though you owe it to anybody else, So
Yeah.
for my dad, I always approach it that, every injury is real. Sometimes I'm proven wrong, but more
Yep.
often
Yep.
than not, they are real. I don't think people set out to go to work and get hurt.
Exactly, exactly. I did workers' compensation case management for a number of years, and I applied exactly what you're saying. And essentially, it's the golden rule, right? You're treating people the way that you'd want to be treated. And sure, did I sometimes get duped? Yeah. Was it common? No. You're right. I mean, people do not wake up in the morning and go, "Oh, I'm going to try to get hurt today at work." Everyone wants to be treated humanely, and
Sure.
it's a great way to, yeah,
And
it's
with my
the,
dad, he never went back to that job, so,
yeah.
you always hear about people filing, petitions and things like that to get, monetary value. And, people think, oh, they're just trying to make, money and things like that, and I remember growing up with my mom being, the sole provider for a while my
Mm-hmm.
dad sort of reinvented himself. And he did,
Mm-hmm.
he went back to college, he became a chemistry teacher.
Wow.
And then at some point he actually got into, chemical manufacturing, and, he became a production superintendent before he retired. And for me, it was, all about, never be afraid to reinvent yourself, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And so, when that opportunity for me from a production standpoint to a safety standpoint came, I just thought, you know what? It's really not, for me, it's never been about what you know. It's always about how hard you'll work to know it. You know what I mean? And so
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
always say, if you put two people next to each other and one has, the highest degree you can get and one doesn't but wants it more, hard work beats everything else. You know what I mean? So that's
Yes, I
really
do.
been my approach.
Yeah, right. So back to that refinery job. So you're at the refinery. You're literally, putting out the fires, like you say, on the radio all the time, and the safety thing opens. What did you think it was going to be, and who kind of mentored you along? Because I'm guessing you're sort of green to, at that point at least, to all things occupational safety.
Yeah, I mean, the refinery was a 24/7 operation, and safety was an 8 to 5 job there. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I had a schedule in which, I was working 12-hour shifts. So there were plenty of times where, I was on site when things were going wrong and there were no safety folks. So,
Mm-hmm.
I had time to,
Okay.
kind of progress through, injuries and things like that. I was always somebody that was curious about, OSHA regulations and things like that, because, at my plant, it was a collective bargaining plant, and so
Sure.
there would be questions raised all the time about what was a violation and what wasn't. So you had to kind of have some knowledge. It actually happened that I was going through a review time, and I was kind of doing a check-in. I felt like I had peaked out in production, and I was questioning the person that was doing my review, who was in human resources. I said, where do you see this going? You know what I mean? Do you
Mm-hmm.
have any upward mobility? Because I was kind of feeling like I was stuck, you know what I mean? And
Yep.
he said, well, we don't have an occupational health nurse right now, and we really we're really having a hard time recruiting one, and you're an EMT and you treated people here before and you always do a really good job. What would you think about doing like a hybrid role between like occupational health and safety specialist? And so it took me about 3 seconds to decide that was what I wanted to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it was more along the lines of how I envisioned what I wanted to do. So
Right.
so that's
Wow.
how I got into it.
Yeah. So how long were you at that job?
So I did that job for about another 2.5 years before I moved on. The advice I can give people there is I was at a point in my career where I went back to it was another review time, right? And I had done very well. I
Yeah.
was the emergency
Mm-hmm.
response coordinator. People knew who I was. We were doing very well, but there was an open safety manager position, and it had been open for a while, and they had not found the right fit. And at this point, I had 13 years experience at this plant.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I made the mention that I wanted to be the safety manager, and at the time I was told, well, you'll likely definitely be in the pool, apply for it. We were going to really help you get there. But then it came around to interview time, and they just decided that I didn't have an environmental engineering degree, so then I was not qualified. And that was unfortunate because after you have 13 years at a place, you tend to know how
Right.
everything works, and I did. But I didn't let that demotivate me. It
Yeah.
was either you were going to sit in the position you were in and not be happy that you were told you couldn't do it, or you were going to use that as motivation to kind of go to the next place. And so that's what brought me to the Inglis House in Philadelphia, that healthcare facility.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
they took a chance on me, and, I went and took a chance on the fact that I thought that I could do it, on a management level. And, I started there as their safety manager, and I was promoted within a year to the director of safety, security, and communications. In a big city, you know what I mean. And so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
one of the most memorable things there was the Pope came to Philadelphia during the time I was there, and he
Wow.
stayed. He literally stayed probably 1.5 blocks from where we were. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
wow.
So the city was shut down. You know what I mean? There was plenty of hospitals that were living in places, and so we had to basically build a plan to live in our facility so that we could make sure people got
Oh,
in and out.
wow.
And
Mm-hmm.
we did. And so for me, that's one of my more really great memories, because it didn't really involve anything negative. You were reacting to a positive.
Right,
So.
right. What a fun story. So not only did your state win the Super Bowl, you also had the Pope visit. Wow.
Right. Yeah.
What's next?
I was gonna say, to this day I still have the video of the Pope riding by on my cell phone, because after we had done it and had everybody living it, we knew he was going in the city. Everybody walked to City Line Avenue and watched him go by. So it was really incredible. So.
Oh, that's interesting. What a fun story. So you've also earned your degree in safety and health. So at what point did you decide, hey, it's time to go to school and do this? And how did you kind of walk through that? And I'm assuming maybe you were employed at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I had never done anything the easy way. I mean, I did not see the value of education as a high school student. You know what I mean? I did not see
Mm-hmm.
the value of education coming out of high school. And so when I got the job at the refinery, within a few years, maybe 5 years, I'll say, when I became the supervisor, I thought to myself, well, now you need a degree. So I started to pursue, a business degree, and, I got my associates. And, around that same time, I was, still pursuing business. This health and safety job came up, and I thought to
Yeah.
myself, you probably should stop and figure out what it is you're going to do, because,
Mm-hmm.
if you continue business, business isn't going to really help you, in the complete sense. So,
Yeah.
I sought out, online schools. There's one in New Jersey called, Thomas Edison State University. When I went there, it was called State College.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's in Trenton, and you get in-state rates, and it's an online school. You go up there maybe once or twice a semester and take tests, but it was really good for me because, all of a sudden I went from the guy that saw no purpose in school to, what do you mean you took a point off my paper? You know what I mean? And that's just kind of the way I've been. Your pride level in your work has changed. You know what I mean? So
Right.
now I'm very much that way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So and I continued that through school and through 2 kids being born, and you know what I mean, and really just
Mm-hmm.
have tried to keep
Mm-hmm.
hustling. So.
Yeah, right, right. So, who over all of these years in this career path, do you have mentors or have you had mentors that kind of have walked in and out of your life that have helped influence you maybe one way or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a safety perspective, EMT is kind of different than occupational health, right? So,
Yeah.
I was fortunate to partner with, at the time at the refinery, they had an outside doctor that they had, and his name was Dr. Michael Bajarski, and he still practices today, and he, in my opinion, does more with less than anybody you can imagine. And by that I mean, his notes are fantastic. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he types them on a typewriter or a computer. You know what I mean? He's
Mm-hmm.
not using these glorified EMR systems that give you, just regular canned things. And
Mm-hmm.
so, he really taught me a lot of stuff, and I think more importantly, he gave me confidence in what I was doing. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
that helped me immensely, because sometimes you need other people to believe in you to believe that you're doing well. And I think that on the other side of it, my family, my wife was a tremendous supporter of me getting into it. You know what I mean? And always has, I think sometimes even more than me, felt that I can do it, so,
we
and
always
then,
need that. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and at the refinery, when I was in charge of the emergency response team, my assistant chief, he also believed that I could do it. You know what I mean? And he was a very,
Sure.
very good friend of mine. And he passed away, about 2 years ago. He was 39 years old and he had two kids. He died of colon cancer. So, for those of you that, have history and stuff like that, it's important for you to know that, just because, you're not 50 years old, or whatever the case may be, you got to keep an eye on that, and so,
Yeah, right.
was a major loss for me, you know what I mean? And like I said, that those are probably the three big ones. But, at Inglis, I had a guy who was not a safety person at all. His name is Harold Strawbridge, and Harold is probably the guru of making everything you talk about in a presentation visual, right? And so
wow.
he was very good at, you would go to these people who had no understanding of safety or no understanding of, planning the Pope visit, and he would put pen to paper and, he would make it visual and they would get it, you know what I mean? And I think that we can probably relate to,
He sounds like a great guy.
Yeah, I mean, we would speak to people and we would be like, what do you mean you don't understand? How could you not understand this? You know what I mean? And Harold was able to kind of show me the bridge between, look, you have the knowledge, they don't. And if you get aggravated with them, they shut down and they don't listen to you. You know what I mean? So paint
a picture.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's awesome.
And I think that was really a tremendous help for me there,
Yeah. I had a mentor not in safety either a number of years ago. He's an industrial psychologist, and I just paths crossed in a job at some point, and he was helping with some project, and he became a mentor to me, somebody that I reached out to for a number of years, and he would listen to me kvetch about a job when I was, thinking, what am I doing here? Where can I go? Kind of struggling with it. And he'd paint these pictures in my head that helped me decide what am I going to do next? And I remember one time he said to me, so Jill, you kind of thought that this job was going to be you're in the barn with the race horses, and you get to groom the racehorse and brush it every day and make it really shiny and perfect and beautiful to be able to run its race. But in actuality, what I'm hearing you say is you're in the back of the barn shoveling the crap.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. You're so right. And he goes, so what do you want to do? Brush the horse or shovel? Keep shoveling. I'm like, I want to brush the horse. He's like, get out of there. I'm like, okay, thanks.
Right.
Nothing to do with safety, but he was just listening to my story and in a compelling way and pushing me forward. So your job right now is in occupational health. Is that a clinic setting, Joe?
Well, so I basically have switched teams, I guess, so to speak, right? We have gone from, trying to keep people safe to, I am now, in charge of developing a, treatment of work injuries plan for a hospital-based system, So,
okay.
We're using an urgent care model to bring folks in that are injured, and
from outside employers.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So, one of the things that I think helps me is, I go out to these employers, and I ask questions like, do you have job descriptions, and what are the types of injuries they're facing? How can we help them? How can we partner with them? And I know about the OSHA logs and things like that they're suffering from, where, maybe they have somebody who, is written as an OSHA recordable, but that's because they can't lift more than 50 pounds, but they were a desk worker who was answering a phone, and it's not really a restriction, what I mean? And for us, like I said, that we genuinely, I think in my group want to be the best, what I mean? And it's still a relatively new program, and we're in the South Jersey area. But I think you have a lot of ambitious people who see this as an opportunity to be the best, and I think, like I said, for me, that's how I approach everything. I always want to try to be the best at what I do.
Yeah. So you get to do a little bit of prevention work with the companies that you reach out to, and then you're also helping guide them through the workers' compensation process when someone's injured. Is that accurate to what you're doing now?
Yes, and we bring new companies on. When we bring those companies on, we talk to them about what the state laws are as far as workers' compensation. We talk to them about, do they have job descriptions they can supply us.
Yeah.
We give them ideas of different policies they may want to create. And some of these companies have never even thought about what happens if somebody has an injury and then they're restricted. And that leads them to basically say, okay, go home, and when you're better, come back. And that gives them a lot of time to watch the attorney ads that flash up and say, have you
Mm-hmm.
been injured at work? And then the people go, you know
Mm-hmm.
what, I have, and I've been wronged. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
hurts companies. And I think like I said, there's a time and place for that. But I also think if the company's buying in on the people and they want them to get better, it's really good to get them back into work. So I have plenty of boilerplate policies that I always say to people, if you want that policy, I'll send it to you. You know what I mean? And so I really
Yeah.
just try to be
Yeah.
a little bit different in that sense.
Right. And it also is hard on the employees' morale if they're at home, not feeling like they're contributing in a meaningful way. And I think you're right. I think many employers just think, okay, so the employee's hurt, they're off work, and aren't thinking about the ramifications, the ramifications of the employee's morale, the ramification of I'm paying, lost wage benefits now. The ramification of I have to find somebody else to do that job and fill
Sure.
in for now. And, I think employers are still on that learning curve of, oh, really, we could bring them back, but it doesn't have to be in their current role, or it could be a different version of their current role, and helping them see that, I think, is really powerful.
And I think, it's always difficult for employers to understand that, in their minds, they're not seeing, well, we're paying the salary technically one way or another, right? It may
Mm-hmm.
not be directly, but, that will go to your insurance, and your insurance, it'll create, loss, and you may have a poor loss ratio at that point. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
there's value in them being around, even if, maybe they're not doing everything they could do. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're reaching out and talking with employers now, are you generally working with management teams? You working with safety people, or who's your primary contact?
So, I mean, it varies, to be honest with you, because South Jersey is a wide scope of different types of business. We have everything from, refineries and industry all the way down to, mom and pop farms that are very seasonal. So it can really
Sure.
depend on what type of business you're dealing with. And I think, I bring the same approach to everybody that, we want you to give us a chance. We want to do right by you. And, we also want a lot of feedback as to, how we can get better. With the safety professionals, I try to speak the safety language, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's what they want to, they want to hear, that the person that's, overseeing the program understands where they're coming from. And
Mm-hmm.
if they think they're getting a sales pitch, then that's not what they're interested in. You know what
Right.
I mean? And
Right.
so, I want them to understand how we're different, so to speak.
Right. So are you able to spend some time in some of these employment settings with some of the safety professionals, maybe looking at some of the risk exposures, particularly when bringing people back? How can we engineer something out? How can we make an improvement to ensure it doesn't happen? The same thing doesn't happen to somebody else. Are you able to do that sometimes?
When we bring on employers, I usually ask, to see their facility, to get an idea of
Yeah.
a tour. And I've really seen some neat places, you know what I mean? And stuff that, you really, you just don't know that that's what they do,
Right.
on the outside, you know what I mean? So I feel fortunate in that regard, because, you understand at that point that some of these jobs aren't out of the scope of what they could do. And some
Mm-hmm.
of it is, a lot harder than I think sometimes the job descriptions say it is, you know what I mean? So it could go
Mm-hmm.
either way.
Right, right. Yeah, I worked in occupational medicine for a while as well, doing similar work exactly to what you're talking about. And, my eyes being able to bring that picture back to the provider who was writing the restrictions was really powerful, because the providers don't always have time to go and do tours of work environments to find out, what is it that this employee is going to go back to. But
Correct.
our eyes get to do that. We can paint that picture to be that partner between the employer and the provider. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty
Absolutely.
cool.
Yep.
Yeah. So in all the years you've been doing this safety, I've got to ask this question because I think this is sometimes a funny answer from different people. What's the craziest thing you've ever done to build street cred with your workforce in different jobs?
I think that I've always been a hands-on person, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Because I came from that refinery where I was a production worker, so
Yeah.
at the refinery it was easy for me. I would just go out on the production floor and talk to people and, listen to what issues they were having and things like that. It became more difficult for me, at the healthcare facility because I'd never done healthcare before, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And so that meant, walking unit to unit, talking to residents, talking to everybody. And actually, believe it or not, as I said, those residents were very, very smart. They just unfortunately were, quad and paraplegic. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I would actually ask them to tell me when they would find safety issues. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
they actually became reporters for me. You know what I mean? So
Wow.
that was very powerful. When I got the job at the HVAC company, I
Mm-hmm.
had a quick company truck. And I would just go to places, you know what I mean? I would go to locations and I would talk to people and I would talk about, how I want to make sure that they don't get hurt. They have to think about what they're doing. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
I really just always again tried to do the right thing. And I had a lot of risk experience there too. So when we would have significant losses, or a water loss or a loss like that I felt that was very significant, impactful on someone else's life. I would even go out to those and talk to those people because the last thing you wanted was here's an insurance adjuster and the company doesn't really care about you, you know what I mean? And so I
Mm-hmm.
always wanted to put myself in the position of how would I feel if that was my house,
Mm-hmm.
or how would I feel if I got hurt at work, so I've
Right.
always approached that. In my current role, still new, but I think a lot of my experience is carrying over into this role because it's stuff that people don't really know, in the order of operations, we'll say, of how to approach an employer and what are the things you can say to get them to listen to you, and have them, come on board or at least want to meet with you.
Yeah. 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 So, Joe, in your path, career path in safety, I'm interested to know, like, how did you go about, or how do you think it happened, maybe accidentally, finding what your niche is in safety? When we look back at our career and all that safety and health encompasses, it can be so vast and often overwhelming to people. Like, am I ever going to learn it all? And the answer is no, you won't. And, sometimes you kind of have to sit with yourself and go, like, what am I really good at? Or what do I really like? And what did that look like for you in finding that niche, assuming you've found it, at least for
Yeah,
now?
and I think I have, I do enjoy the occupational health setting because, it really is kind of impactful to people that, have already unfortunately had an incident, you know what I mean? Hopefully you can prevent those, but where I'm at now, you're dealing with folks that have been injured, you know what I mean? And so for
Yeah.
me, like you said, it's such a wide scope of things, you know what I mean? And I enjoyed a lot of different aspects of safety, but I just knew what I liked the most, you know what I mean? And I just say when, people are getting into it, try to figure out what the parts are that you like, you know what I mean? Because there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different parts, and I think that, you can worry too much about trying to learn them all, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's, you can see those job descriptions that have, we want a safety manager that has 30 years experience in those process safety management and occupational health and everything else. But the reality is, that everybody starts somewhere, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to start and be good at what you do and take that with you, and then maybe you're on to something a little bit different, and you take that with you, and you
Mm-hmm.
build up a portfolio of things that and are good
Mm-hmm.
at, and I think it makes you better overall, so
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. I can see that.
I mean, for me, I think
Um,
the most important thing, in safety,
mhm.
regardless what direction you go in, is you have to be passionate about it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like if you go and you see these speakers sometimes at the conferences, there are some that just really, do a fantastic job. You know what I mean? And they're
Mhm.
very passionate about what they do.
Mhm.
And sometimes I watch them in all of how passionate they are because they're way better than me. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
you can't, to me, safety in general is not a job. You know what I mean? It's a responsibility. You know what I mean? So you got to understand there's people relying on you to
Mm-hmm.
do the right thing for them. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So it's a
Yeah.
much higher level of responsibility than, hey, we have to make that widget and get it out by the end of the month, you know?
Right.
So,
Yeah, safety is a job, is a responsibility, not a job. That is awesome. That's a quotable quote, Joe. I
thank
love
you.
that. I love that. So when you're stuck and you need some help with what are your resources? Where do you usually go for information? How do you find answers to things that you don't know?
Well, there's a couple different things that I've done. I have a big presence on LinkedIn, you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so that gives me a wide variety of people I can talk to.
Yeah.
I think that you could never be afraid to talk to your boss. You know what I mean? That's a relationship you need to have, because sometimes the things you're up against have nothing to do with safety. They have to do with workplace politics or things like that, and ultimately, if you're the one leading that charge on that battle, you might be the one that's identified as, the problem. But, if you
Mm-hmm.
escalate it through the proper channels, you a lot of times can have meaningful, progress on that. And, I think that everybody has varying degrees of aggravation and safety. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that can say they haven't been told no, or they haven't been aggravated with the way that somebody's done something, or
Mm-hmm.
any of that, and it's sort of, you have to turn that into something constructive, and you have to kind of learn from when you didn't, you know what I mean? So for
Mm-hmm.
me to sit here and say I've never done it, you know what I mean, would be foolish, you know what I mean? And I think that that's, you have to learn and better yourself each time,
Right.
and say, well, these are the areas I can improve on next time,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, your point on not being afraid to reach out to your boss, I think, is really good advice to anyone listening. I know I've made that mistake. A number, I don't know, maybe 3-4 jobs ago that I can think of. I really was kind of afraid to talk to the administrator of the place where I was working. Sort of felt intimidated, like maybe I didn't have a right to have a voice with that particular person. And the manager that I was reporting to at the time she was the one carrying my message to the ultimate decision maker. And that didn't work so well. It's kind of like playing that telephone game with the cups and the yarn, like what's the message going to be on the other end? And I learned very much the hard way that having someone else carry your message doesn't always work.
Right,
And
exactly.
I made a promise to myself after that job. I'm like, I will never do that again.
Right.
I
Yeah.
will I will I will be uncomfortable, but I'm going to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and I will make those relationships, and I will find ways to be able to speak directly to the decision makers. And
Sure.
it's served me well, but gosh, it's hard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, it is intimidating. But your message gets diluted, you know what I mean? Sometimes,
Hmm.
if you don't do it. And sometimes, the only message that they've gotten is, hey, you have a sense of urgency. They have no idea why you have that sense of urgency. And it sounds like you're yelling, the sky is falling, when really you have a very good reason for what you're saying,
Hmm.
and it's being missed by that person, and I think, you talk about going, talking up to people, and making sure they get the message. But one of the most important things I learned, when I was at the refinery in charge of that emergency response team, was to also talk down to your folks, make sure those that report to you know what you expect from them, and I'm by example. I would have, meetings with my emergency response team every month, right? And I would always
Hmm.
say to people, the exact same statement over and over again. If we ever get into a situation where there's, a fire, there's a spill, there's some sort of, incident, and you can't find the person that's missing, and you can't safely get into that area, then you need to protect yourself and get back out. You know what I mean? Because there's
Hmm.
there's no value in having two groups of people that are lost. And so, it would almost seem like people would look at me like, yeah, right, nothing's ever going to happen, and
Hmm.
that's just complete
Hmm.
silly.
We're
Um,
invincible. Hmm.
yeah, we're invincible. It's never going to happen until, I can remember one specific morning, we had an incident where, chemicals were pumped into the wrong tank, and there was a, hydrogen explosion, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
basically, those chemicals created, a cloud, you know what I mean? As soon as the
Hmm.
tank exploded, right? And the cloud, pretty much blocked the entire view of a camera within seconds. So, it was very difficult to know what was going on. I wasn't at the plant. I was actually at home, right? And I
Hmm.
remember, I was responding to the plant because I heard them, dispatch the local fire company and stuff. And on my way in, I could hear, my team operating. You know what I mean? But they were doing all
Wow.
the things I told them to do. You know what I mean? So they were searching for the person and they pulled back out. You know what I mean? Well, here we had lost two people in that incident that we couldn't account for, right? But they had
Wow.
ended up going out the back door. You know what I mean? And then,
Hmm.
you know, if I had sent my team in to try to find them, you know what I mean, we would have had more problems. And so then once those people were accounted for, everybody was still in that really hyped up mode that we got to go in and we got to solve this problem now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the thing is, your responsibility is to your people. You know what I mean? And to make sure they're safe. And the reality was there was nobody in there that was, you know, at risk. You know what I mean? We had a building that was damaged. We had problems, but, you know, we needed to slow down and make sure that when I sent people in, it was safe, you know. And so we
Hmm.
had to shut all the utilities off. We had to shut, you know, all the, things that were coming through the pipes off. But then we
Hmm.
went in and it was safe. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
to me, that was one of the more meaningful things that I realized. Wow, you have to say things over and over and
Hmm.
over again until it gets
Hmm.
into somebody's head, because saying it once doesn't mean anything. You know?
Right. Yeah. So repeating, like you said, the message, remembering to carry our message upstream, but also downstream as well,
Sure.
and being repetitive about it. The airlines do that really well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
we're getting that message every time. Put on your own oxygen mask first before you help someone else,
Right.
and all those messages, which essentially is part of what the message was for you that day, and how proud you must have been of your team.
I definitely was, and like I said, to me, that was one of the larger successes, you know, with emergency response. And like I said, for me, it was a valuable lesson in teaching people, and I think, I don't know, about your career, but I never thought I was going to be the teacher or the educator. That just seems so foreign to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
just not going to do it. You know what I mean? And then,
Hmm.
I became a CPR instructor, and I
Hmm.
emergency response team. I was doing classes with them. For me, it was very important at that point to realize that I was no longer the new guy or the young guy anymore. It's important to pass knowledge down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that has been something I really try to do now.
It was a realization that's probably come to me in the last, I'd say, maybe 4 to 5 years, where I have less and less mentors, and
Sure.
I become the one that people are reaching out to.
Right.
And it's a big responsibility, and sometimes it's really hard. And you think back, like, did I answer that correctly? Or someone was asking me questions last week. I was guiding an employer through a workplace fatality they had, and there were some things I had hung up the phone. I'm like, oh, I need to tell them that, I'm like, the onus of being the one with the knowledge is a pretty big responsibility. So I ended up picking up the phone and I'm like, okay, and this and this and this and this, and they're
Sure.
like, okay, thank you. But it feels sometimes like a bigger responsibility to be in that teaching mode than I was in the learning mode way back when, which seems kind of crazy. But our work in safety is preventative. You've worked both on the reaction side in the work that you've done and in the prevention side, and you're talking about this chemical release you had in the plant. You really leaned into your prevention work, and I think it's one of the hardest things in our profession, to try to sell or convince people that prevention is where the rubber meets the road. So when things go sideways, you've got that to lean into. And I think
Sure.
that's such a hard concept for us to continue, knocking on the door every day and talking about prevention when everybody thinks it can't happen to them.
Right. And I think that is true. People think it can't happen to them. And then, I think to a certain degree, depending on how you're wired, and, I think emergency response people are wired this way. Response is fun. You know what I mean?
Right.
It really does hype you up. And I
Yeah.
think anybody that's ever, had the tones hit or been dispatched can tell you that there's just an uncanny adrenaline rush that you get from it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it's not sustainable either. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
eventually, you burn out from that. You know what I mean? And so, for me, the calls at 9, 10 o'clock, midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, where you're hearing about all these incidents, they can wear on you. You know what I mean? And so, like,
Right.
have to make sure
Yes.
that you're doing everything you can do to prevent those things.
Right. Right. Fighting fires, literally and figuratively. It's good. It's important work. We need it, but it also doesn't build anything long term.
Sure, absolutely.
And so we have to find that balance in our careers, right? we're building things that are sustainable and lasting at the same time. So, Joe, you and I have both been talking about different jobs we've had, career changes we've made, and I know that sometimes I'm getting questions from other people in our career who are asking, like, when do I know it's the right time to move on? How do I make those decisions?
Sure.
What has that looked like for you?
Well, actually, it doesn't always smack you in the face. You know what I mean? Sometimes you put up with a lot before you realize it's too much. And I listened to a podcast by you actually, and in that podcast, there were things that were said and it was like my aha moment at this job. And the job. It was basically, when you're not being listened to, there's no sign of change, you know what I mean? And I think, you're being sort of rebuffed in all of your ideas, there is, it's time to look elsewhere because, your impact is not meaningful, you know what I mean? And so, for the other thing, I think to be more specific was, I think when you talked about your ethics being compromised, and I think that in safety, we're asked to be flexible at times, right? Sometimes we can't always solve every single problem at that exact moment and keep things running because we need our companies to make money, but at the same time, we need them to be safe. So it's always that delicate balance, But if you can check all three boxes, you know what I mean? The not being listened to, there's no sign of change, and your ethics are being compromised. I think that you have to start to think maybe this isn't the place for me because the corporate culture there is not conducive to your success. You know what I mean? And so. Right. I remember how impactful that those particular. I actually wrote it down and I kept looking at it and I go, is this me? Is this really what's happening to me? You know what I mean? And I realized it was. You know what I mean? And so I just decided, you needed to get out. You know what I mean? And so fortunately, like I said, I had another opportunity come along and it worked out well for me, and that's what I can tell people. I mean, you're going to encounter no a lot as a safety professional. And just because you encounter no, that doesn't mean you leave the job because no is part of the job, right? Because ultimately, if you had your way, you would install the greatest safety system ever and, you'd have no injuries. You might buy all this PPE and, but there's a business side to that too. You know what I mean?
Right.
You can't do everything.
Gray area.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's not when someone says no to you. It's when, they're not willing to listen to you at all. You know what I mean? They're not willing to listen to the problem. Either they're in denial that the problem even exists. And, that becomes when you have to start to think to yourself, well, if my purpose is to identify problems and solve problems, and now no one's listening to me, no one's willing to solve those problems with me. What am I really here to do? You know what I mean? And I think that it impacts you professionally if you stay at a place that things, bad things happen to people solely because, they stayed around. Think about, any of these major incidents that involve companies and, you start to think, well, what about their safety professional? What happened to them after all that? And I'm sure from a professional standpoint, it's very damaging to your career. But remember, I said for me, it's always been about confidence, right? And if my confidence, if you felt a certain way and, you felt like, somebody wasn't agreeing with you, and maybe it's as simple as this needs to change, or maybe it's as extreme as you think there's going to be a fatality there, and you express that, and somebody does not, respond to you. You're really in a position where that is not doing anybody any good. And if what you think's going to happen happens, and you're not being listened to, you've damaged yourself.
Yeah. I mean, beautifully said. No is definitely a part of the job. And then what do we do with those no's as we're learning and figuring out how to build business cases to redirect, represent, what needs to happen. And I think you're right. When we get those hard no's repeatedly and our ethics are being compromised because of it, it's time to move on. And the great thing about our profession is that there are opportunities. If people have the ability to be flexible, maybe with their geographics and depending on where they're living, there are so many safety positions right now. There's so many people retiring out that started in the way back when OSHA was first being adopted. I'm contacted pretty often for people who are like, how do we recruit? Where do we look? Where do we go to find safety jobs? And so I think the good news is that there's a place for us, and there's opportunities for us to figure out, what's our niche and how can we get there? How can we get there?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So Joe, you've done a lot of things. You've done a lot of things to be proud of. What's maybe we can close with sharing a story of something that you've accomplished that you're really proud of.
Yeah, I think, you learn, both professionally and personally that, there's a right and wrong way to do things, you know what I mean? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that for me, I've grown as a person, as I've gotten older, especially after the loss of, my friend, you know what I mean? And it
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
had a very negative impact on me. And, I would say that, be kind to people, understand where they're coming from, understand that everybody's fighting a battle.
Mm-hmm.
And so the approach you need to take, professionally as a safety professional is that, maybe they're not wearing their safety glasses because they're so flustered that their kid had something happen to them that morning, you know what I mean? Or, maybe they forgot that valve was open because something else is going on. And that doesn't mean you don't, follow through with discipline and things like that. But, sometimes you have to walk a mile in someone else's shoes to really understand that, people don't, like I said before, people don't intend to screw up. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
don't think anyone has ever woken up and said, I'm going to screw up today. You know what I mean? And I think that has been probably the most important thing, both personally and professionally, I've learned because, I have two kids, and and I think that my wife and I, we constantly are interested in how they're doing in school and all the various activities they do. You know what I mean? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that for us, we know when a mistake happens, it's a learning opportunity, right? And,
Yeah.
and so rather than yell and scream and all that, sometimes you have to kind of revert to just teaching, and
Yeah.
teaching's
Right.
really important.
Right. What is this? What is this here to teach me? Why
Exactly.
is this happening? What is the message?
Yep.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're very proud of your growth in your own humanity, and what a perfect reflection on yourself. I think that's great, and meeting people where they are,
Exactly.
That's
I think,
wonderful.
be humble, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I always say to people when I go from job to job, I've had a number of times where I walk into an office and somebody says, "Is this okay?" And I always say to them, I started on a refinery floor that was 100 degrees. I moved into an office that had a cinder block wall. My next job had windows, you know what I mean? And so,
Yeah,
be appreciative for what you have, because,
that's right.
every little bit of it is something. It's a mark on how you've progressed, you know what I mean? And like you
Mm-hmm.
said, always reflect at where you came from, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, it may
Mm-hmm.
feel like you've made no difference whatsoever. But like I
Mm-hmm.
said, there's a lot of people I've learned a lot
Mm-hmm.
from, in various
Mm-hmm.
organizations, that are all over. Listen to the ASSE and listen to the National Safety Council, and listen to your messagings, and you can learn a lot by just approaching any of these webinars or podcasts by simply thinking to yourself, I'm going to learn something, by being here. Even though I think I know everything about this topic,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to sit and learn, and that was the approach I took when I realized it was time to get out with that job, because it was sort of,
Yeah.
what does the new safety professional need to know? And I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm not a new safety professional, but this sounds like a good, podcast. I'm going to listen to it. You know what I mean? And I walked out of there
Yeah.
with the most important message of my career. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Joe, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. I know it's going to resonate with people. Thank you so much.
cool. Yeah, I definitely appreciate you guys having me, and always available on LinkedIn for anybody that wants to connect. I am not
Great.
somebody that filters. I want to try to have as many connections as I can, and I want to try to be as impactful as I can. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Thank you all so much for joining in and listening today. And thank you for the work you all do to make sure your workers make it home safe every day. You can listen to all of our episodes at vividlearningsystems.com or subscribe in the podcast player of your choosing. If you have a suggestion for a guest, including yourself, please contact me at social@vividlearningsystems.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.